So we've been talking about ways that we can find more self-care, and we're going to continue with talking about different ways we can feel differently in order to experience some self-care. And one of my favorite ones, and ones that I think parents need the most, is to feel differently. We need to experience what it feels like to give ourselves some kindness, to kind of give yourself the care that you often need, which I find even though parents are kind of built-in caretakers for their kids, they're not often so great at being caretakers for themselves, unfortunately. We saw this in our parent survey. It's very easy as a parent to feel like my needs are supposed to come second. But what would it look like if you kind of gave yourself some compassion to sort of prioritize yourself a little bit more? I think this is really critical because as parents, we've talked about we experience a lot of guilt. And I think that's in part because we hold ourselves to really terribly high standards. And we often criticize ourselves when we don't meet those standards. I think if our workplaces could see the way we talk to ourselves as parents, we would all get fired. Because if we talk to a coworker like that, we would totally get fired, right? So it's like the way we speak to ourselves like a drill sergeant, in this incredibly self-critical way where our standards are never high enough, et cetera, et cetera. This is the way we all talk to ourselves. And we do that not because we're masochists. I think we do that because we think it works. If I just hold myself to really high standards of being a perfect parent and a perfect worker and a perfect spouse, then I'll get there and I'll be perfect in all these domains. But of course, that doesn't work. And study after study shows that the act of talking to yourself in that harsh a way winds up making you perform worse. It winds up making you harder to achieve the thing you really want to achieve. And so we need a different way out. And the way out that lots of social scientists have come up with is the path of engaging in self-compassion, which we're going to define as a sort of attitude that involves treating yourself with kindness, especially in difficult times when things are tough, and recognizing that making mistakes is part of being human. If you need a good deep dive into self-compassion, I really recommend Kristin Neff's book, where she kind of breaks it down. She actually thinks of self-compassion as having these three parts. First is one that we've mentioned a little bit so far, this idea of mindfulness. You kind of have to know where you're coming from. You have to be like, this is really hard right now. I'm struggling right now. I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. I'm feeling really guilty. Whatever it is, you recognize those negative emotions. But then you do a bit of a switch, and that's the common humanity step where you say, and that's normal. It's normal as a parent to experience this kind of stress. All parents are going through this. It's normative to screw up. It makes sense. I'm just human. I'm never going to be perfect, right? That's the common humanity step. You say, yes, I'm feeling this tough thing, and it makes sense. Of course I'm going to feel that tough thing. But you don't stop there. You end with what Neff calls self-kindness, where you say, what can I do to be kind to myself? What can I take off my plate? How can I treat myself like a friend? And I like this framing of how can you treat yourself like a friend? Because I think sometimes we think of self-compassion almost as self-indulgence, where we're just letting ourselves off the hook. We're kind of giving ourselves a pass that we don't deserve. But if you think about how you'd treat a friend, you probably wouldn't do that. If your friend was really screwing up in their parenting, you wouldn't be like, that's fine, you do you, whatever. But you wouldn't scream at them like a drill instructor either. You'd be like, hey, what's going on? Let's get really curious about this. How can we problem solve? How can we fix this so everybody benefits, right? That's the attitude you bring to yourself, this kind of curious, problem-solving, compassionate mode. You apply that to yourself. Kristin Neff has found that self-compassion winds up allowing us to do whatever we're motivated to do better, whether that's in sports, in our parenting, at work, and so on. It's like a kind of motivational drug that we should all be taking because we end up doing better. But it also has a host of other benefits. One is that it protects us from truly negative emotions, like the kinds of things that come up in the context of trauma. One of my favorite studies by Kristin Neff and her colleagues is that she's taught self-compassion to combat veterans, people in Afghanistan and Iraq who've actually seen combat. And she finds that it reduces rates of PTSD in these individuals, which is impressive, right? So when you're going through something really bad, allowing yourself to recognize and be mindful that it's bad, notice that it's that's just being human, and treat yourself with kindness, it can nip trauma in the bud. So powerful, right? But maybe closer to home, these are the kinds of things that allow us to do a little bit better. It allows us to help your future self. So people who learn more self-compassion eat healthier. They wind up going to the gym more often. They save more money for retirement. Again, it's easier to sort of self-regulate if you're being nice to yourself. Both for us and I think for our kids, self-compassion is incredibly powerful because it teaches us compassion for other people. So if you practice self-compassion, it's easier to be compassionate to your spouse, to your friends, to your siblings, to et cetera, because you've kind of trained it on yourself. So it's a great way to kind of train in others. And it's one of the reasons I think parents modeling self-compassion, but also maybe finding ways to teach self-compassion to their kids is so important. It's kind of the juice of empathy that we want all our kids to have. And so self-compassion is really important, but it can be kind of hard. And so I think one of the great hacks that we can all use, especially as parents, to experience a little bit more self-compassion is to start not with self-compassionate talk, which can be tough, but self-compassionate touch. Imagine when you're going through a tough time that you are your kid and you're going to embrace them in the way that you're giving them loving touch. So maybe you give yourself a little hug, the like stroke that you do on your kid's shoulders. I invite you all, the camera won't be on you, but do it, try it yourself, try it out, right? And what's funny is that your brain is stupid. Your brain doesn't know who's touching you. If you touch yourself, it thinks it's someone else, right? We could think of other contexts in which that happens, but it works in the kind of compassionate time too, right? But this is the beauty, is like your brain thinks, oh, this is a compassionate coach or friend who really cares about me. You just hacked the system. And I think when we're in that mode, it makes it easier to do this self-talk. And you go through each of the steps. First, mindfulness. This is really difficult right now. I'm struggling. I'm feeling hopeless. This is super tough. Whatever it is. Common humanity, but stress is part of life. I'm only human. It makes sense that I'm struggling. This all is part of my common human experience. Finally, self-kindness. What do I need right now? Really good question. What can I take off my plate? Often this self-kindness is hard. You're gonna need to set some boundaries and make some sacrifices, but that's what you need. And if you talk to a good problem-solving friend, they probably help you come up with that too. So this is self-compassion. And I think this is a way that we can force ourselves to feel differently. We can feel like even in the midst of a stressful experience, we're not getting screamed at, we're getting the care that we need.